Hey everybody, we have made it through another week of class. Thanks for all your hard work and for all of your communication this week. I had more emails and folks have done a great job with getting started on our science writing project. So awesome all around. So a little catching up. I wanted to get a second video in this past week and I couldn't do it. So I'm going to try to cram everything in today that I can. So we talked a bit about science writing, and you've read about science writing. We know that science writing is quite formal most of the time, that there is a lot of detail, and that it is important when considering science writing to think about the context and to note the precision that those writers use. Now, we also know that science writing is typically delivered to a pretty narrow audience. And I'm coming over here to my other screen, so I'm sorry I don't keep looking you in the eye. One of the issues that we run into with science writing, people often complain about it being inaccessible to the general public. So then we have our science writers for news outlets who seek to take that information and present it to a broader audience. And in many cases, it misses the mark, right? We've talked some, I believe, in this class about wanting our writing to be reader-centered. And the problem that we run into in those situations with science writing and other highly technical pieces of information is that a lot of times it's hard to make that information reader-centered. And so what we find in many cases is that the writing gets taken down quite a few notches. Now, we've also gotten to a point that our online media is very advertising driven. And of course, most media has been advertising driven, yes. But we're in a moment now where we see a lot of things like clickbait headlines. And going back to week 3, I gave you sets of articles to review. I gave you the article, the hydrogen sulfide article that, gave you the synthesis and functional evaluation, blah, blah, blah. Very hard to understand, really elevated language, incredibly technical. And then the ad that the New York Post ran with its clickbaity headline about, sniffing your partner's farts. Right. So we see very quickly the major differences between science writing, academic journal articles, and the basic kind of media article that's out there to get people's attention and drive revenue. Now, when you look at these on the surface, and I know you all talked about this in English 111, but just kicking it back for a minute, when you look at these, the differences are apparent right there on the surface, right? The science article is really in depth, big blocks of text. Meanwhile, you go over to the New York Post site and it's ads everywhere, lots of color, lots of photos, just very all over the place. And you see this similarly, but in a less of a stark contrast, we'll say, between the article that discussed parrots voluntarily help each other obtain food rewards, and its partner article, which, while a lot easier to understand, wasn't quite so clickbaity, the Polly Sheracracker article from NPR. And so here you see that even among media and popular articles, there are going to be some vast differences, right? We know that New York Post is a less reliable, generally speaking, source than NPR, right? So it's important to look at the credentials, and a lot of you have been pointing that out in your journals this week, noticing the credentials, being willing to do some of your own research, seeing, what are the other kinds of information offered on a site as far as deciding whether something is reliable. Now, all that said, we know that we don't have time to go run down all of these scientific articles. If something is incredibly important to us, say we've gotten a diagnosis, yeah, then we may go to the New England Journal of Medicine. We may go to Science, the journal, to do some in-depth research. But as far as our day-to-day life is concerned, I am not one who's going to go look up articles on parrots, right? This is a really interesting article from NPR. If I hear that on Science Friday on my drive home, I'm going to feel like I've learned something and I'm going to think about the implications. But it's not something that I'm going to typically seek out on my own. So in many cases, we find ourselves relying on the media to get a lot of our scientific information. And that's the reaction that I'm seeing from a lot of you in those journals. Another reason to think about this, when I was putting together the assignments, I initially taught English 112. I think I did the first run in fall 2014. And when I was putting together assignments for this class, I talked to people in the fields. I talked to a friend who's a geneticist who teaches science, who has to communicate with the public. And I asked him what he felt like science students needed to know. And he said the number one thing they need to know is how to take this highly technical information and communicate it to a general audience. So that's something that I want you to think about, whether science is your field or whatever it is. When we have a field of expertise, part of our job is going to be communicating that to people who aren't part of that field in a way that they can understand it. And that's really the focus of this science writing assignment that I've given you, is to look at that article that you have, which is probably to some degree quite technical and deals with terms and concepts that the average reader is not going to be familiar with, and figuring out how well they've conveyed that information, and then how you can summarize that information for a general audience. That's the main objective of this essay. So if you have chosen an article, and I'm checking them as I go through, I've got a few more left. If you've chosen a solid article from a scientific or technical journal, and you can critique it, you can say, this isn't 100% clear, they need to work on this, and then you can summarize that for a general audience so that they get the main idea, something more akin to what the NPR article does here. Then you will have essentially hit the metrics for the essay. So from there, a couple of things. Let's think about APA format up next. So I've had a few questions with APA format. Most of them have been pretty technical questions. Most of them have been dealing with citation. So keep in mind that APA does not have you do the upper left corner information that MLA does in a document. Instead of a header with the last name and page number, APA asks for a running head in major documents with the page number, a shortened version of the title and the page number. So the newest edition of APA says that's not required for student essays. I'm not pushing it for the science writing essay. You don't need a title page or anything like that. This is a shorter, less formal essay. This is just a place for you to dip your toe in a bit. APA does allow for the use of headings. So if you want to head your sections, you absolutely can. We're not going to get in depth with headings until we do our first MRAD essay in a couple weeks when we work in the social sciences. You don't need to worry about that right now. Right now, 1-inch margins, double spaced, and properly cite for APA. In your in-text citations, you're still going to use parenthetical citations. APA has the year of publication in parentheses after the author's name on first mention and includes it in the in-text citation. You'll also see a comma, a P period, and then the page number. If you are working with an article with pages, you can see the pages if you look at the PDF. I know that some journals are fully online and don't do the PDFs of printed pages anymore, so you may be working with something that does not have page numbers. I understand that. So those are really the main points that I wanted to touch on this week. So I ask you, before you submit this essay, get someone outside the field to review it to see if your information makes sense. It's hard to think about what folks outside our field don't know sometimes, so it can be useful to get that second set of eyes. You're welcome to get a one-on-one session with the Writing Center or to submit the essay to the online writing lab. I'm not requiring that, but I do recommend it, especially if you are having concerns about APA citing, if you're having concerns about whether you have communicated clearly. Those are great resources. I do recommend not waiting until the last minute. They do have drop-in hours for face-to-face tutoring, but sometimes as we get into the semester, the online writing lab can back up a little bit. So let me jump back to our folders. There's an activity that I had listed in the folder for this past week that I did not get to, something that I wanted to do a video on, and I'm going to bump it to this week. But I wanted you to compare the articles that I had dropped in the week 3 folder and plot them, and I'm going to drop a Google Doc into our folder for this week. This is not for credit. It's just something for us to do, something a little bit interactive, asking you basically to plot them on a continuum. So I will get that up by Monday. Again, it's not for credit. It's just something for us to do, to practice, to play with a little bit. Nothing stressful. Don't stress yourself. I know you've got the essay to wrap up. So as you grow as a writer, you're going to develop your voice as a writer, your writing voice, and you'll see it change. In English 111, you may have discussed the concept of code switching, where we change the way that we talk based on who we're with and what we're doing. And a lot of times that is a very subconscious switch. You communicate differently in your home from how you communicate with your boss, from how you communicate with your friends, from how you communicate at church, if you participate in that. So we communicate in different ways in different contexts, right? And I want you to think about writing in the disciplines in the same way. We have our academic communication norms, yes, but they're going to change a little bit based on whether we're in the sciences, the social sciences, in the humanities, based on who our audience is. And that, you will have a different voice writing for a general audience about your profession than you would talking to someone in the field. I hope that makes sense. Now, for those of you who are struggling with that a little bit, worry less, write more. It will come. I'm going to give you pointers and feedback, and the way that you communicate is going to change based on the context, based on what you're doing. So other things that I wanted to remind you of. I know that, again, I know we've come from 111. Some folks it's been very recent. Some folks it's been a while. Remember the difference between quoting and paraphrasing and summarizing. When you use the author's exact words, they should be in quotation marks. When you are keeping the idea but changing the wording and sentence structure, that is a paraphrase. It should still be cited. And when you summarize, you're taking what the author said and you are condensing it down. You're shrinking it up. You should always give credit to where the ideas came from. When you're summarizing, make sure it's clear that it is a summary, not to say this is a summary of blah, 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 but you do want to make it clear this is what the author said. These are the ideas that author conveyed, not something that you are just creating out of whole cloth. And I know you've had practice with that in 111, but sometimes folks can be rusty. Please make sure that you are paraphrasing, quoting, and citing appropriately. If that is an area where you feel like you need some extra help, this is a good thing to get one-on-one help with me on. It's also a good thing to go to the Writing Center's virtual sessions and get some assistance on. And then I know there are going to be some folks who have a hard time getting started. I know some of you have already done it. Some of y'all have been trying to turn in this paper since last week, so I know some folks are done. For those of you who are not done, you're not behind, but you do need to get started. And one of the ways that I recommend getting started when you're having a hard time getting the draft going is to do what I call writing from the inside out. So you're starting with the body of your essay. Don't try to start with the introduction. If you've got one and you're ready to roll, do it. But a lot of students psych themselves out, and a lot of writers, frankly, psych themselves out trying to figure out how to start this thing that they're writing. It's hard to introduce writing, and it's really hard to introduce something when you don't know yet what it is. So I recommend starting with what you know. And maybe that means critiquing the article first. And because I think that it's a good place to start, because I've given you some guidance on what to do, right? You can read this article and tell what's clear and what's not. you can read this article and tell whether they have provided good context or not. And that is a place where you can start. Once you get something in your word processor, once you put pen to paper, you can get moving. So if you're having a hard time getting started, go there. Now, if you're having a hard time even getting started with your critique, if you're having a hard time getting started with the summary, go back to the article, do some annotating. We talked about the concept of annotating when you all read Adler's How to Mark a Book in week 2. So go back to that idea. Think about it. What was confusing? What gave you trouble? What was really clear? What was interesting? What was an aha? Go to those places, make some notes. If you annotate like that when you are reading an article, it makes the writing process easier because you've got some things to go back to. So again, I know some of you rocking and rolling, and some of you are having some hesitation. And if you're having hesitation, try those things. Try going back to the article, try some annotation, try writing from the inside out, starting with those body paragraphs rather than trying to, construct your introduction and thesis. Which brings me to introduction and thesis. Sometimes the students will say, oh, what should I do in an essay like this? This isn't your standard 5-paragraph essay, right? I didn't say, make an argument about blah, blah, blah. I mean, I kind of am because I'm telling you to critique it and to provide a summary. So your introduction could go a variety of ways. Maybe you want to give a little background information on the field. Maybe you want to talk generally about analysis and clearly communicating information. Lots of ways you can go. You should definitely introduce your article and the authors, and you should provide a statement about how well the article reaches its audience and the main idea, the main concept of that article. And one more thing I'll remind you of, don't just try to write this from the abstract of the article. You need to read the article. Sometimes students just kind of hit the abstract and roll with it, but here you're going to need to provide, in your critique, it's going to be helpful to provide some quotes from the text as evidence of the things you're saying. You tell me this is a really hard to understand sentence. Show me some of that sentence and what makes it hard to understand. You tell me they use difficult to understand language. Quote some of that and show me that it's difficult to understand. So those are the big things. Just really working on this essay this week. Definitely consult the Little Seagull Handbook if you feel like you need to go back and brush up on some things. They've got really good APA resources. They've got good general writing resources. I don't want to, force everyone into a full review of English 111. I know that everybody doesn't need that, but if you feel like you need some extra help, those resources are there. The Writing Center's there, and I'm here. I can help. Don't be ashamed or embarrassed to come to me and say, oh, I never really got the hang of X, Y, or Z. Could you help me with that? Also, don't stress out. I want you to do a good job with this essay, but I also want you to recognize that I'm going to be nice on this first one. I'm going to give you a lot of feedback, but this is also a time when I see kind of where everybody's baseline is. Yeah, I've gotten journals from you. I've gotten some short writing from you, but this is the first bigger piece of writing that I'm going to get. And here's where I can sort of figure out where we are. So don't drive yourself crazy. It's the first essay, but it's not like, the defining moment of the semester. Don't my hands look enormous when I'm video and gesturing like this? Anyway, clearly it's Friday and I'm tired, and so I'll call it. If you have questions, if there are things you need me to go over specifically in a video for the class or for a one-on-one session, please be in touch. I hope you all have a great weekend. I hope this week goes well for you. If you need me, I'm here. Y'all take care.